Welcome to the next new part of Protection Review. This is the big debate. This is the big debate. One of the subjects that might come up over the course of the next hour is advertising. And I want you just to think about advertising just for a few moments. What is it about advertising that always grabs your attention? Is it a startling headline? Is it a blistering statistic? Is it an incorrect headline? Is it something downright wrong? I also want you to think about adverts that are annoying. You know, watching a TV program and all of a sudden there's an ad break. Or like me, you're wanting to read something on a website, a news website mainly, and all these things keep popping up in your face, and you're trying to read an article and it positions itself over the article so you can't read it and you can't get it out of the way. It can be annoying, can't it? Advertising. I've had a love-hate relationship with advertising over my career. I like it because it's been my career to a large extent. And I can trace it way back to a school teacher in my English class, and he read out to us a book which was called The Hidden Persuaders. And within that book, they taught us the basic formula for advertising. AIDA. Anybody have heard of AIDA? All the marketing people will. A-I-D-A. A for attention, I for interest, D for desire, A for action. Now, when we put out a bulletin to say that we were launching the big debate, we caught everybody's attention. We caught everybody's attention because people sent emails and said, we would pay good money to see these people go up against each other on the stage.
Where's our share?
It created a massive amount of interest. And that interest turned into desire to book a place on the Protection Review conference. And the action, they followed through straight away and booked the place. So today we have 3 heavyweights from the protection industry. And we're going to be debating advertising, potentially. We're going to be looking at business quality, advice versus non-advice, and many other subjects that may come from you guys or from the Twitter feed. Now, notable by its absence is a product provider stood up here on the stage. In fairness, Kevin and I have done a lot of talking to product providers to get views on all of the subjects that we're going to be debating this afternoon, and some questions that I can give to our big debaters here. We're going to kick off by asking each of them to start off with their 5-minute overview. Now, what I don't want to do today is to act like a typical chairperson. So there's none of this going through me. Can I answer that, Roger? Can Emma answer that? It's going to be the 3 of them talking. In fact, I might just melt away to the side unless I actually need to intervene to push things along or to break things up, depending upon how things go. So that's the way I'd like to start off. So we have, and everybody knows the 3. Emma Thomson from Sesame Bankhall, originally with LifeSearch, but also the founder of Women in Protection. Phil Jeynes, many roles, Underwrite Me, Vitality, now Reassured, and something to do with football.
Oh, yeah.
And Tom Baigrie, the founder of LifeSearch, originally founded LifeSearch because he felt that people were getting a bum deal from bank assurers. So let's start with the first 5 minutes. Mr. Tom Baigrie, a big round of applause, please, everybody.
Good afternoon. Our market should start and end with the consumer. So imagine, please, that standing next to me is a woman in her mid-30s, and in front of her are 2 children. Marsha is her name. A friend passed away recently, so Marsha has taken on the job of sorting out some life cover. She does what almost everyone does. She Googles it. And what does our market, this room, collectively so keen on being trusted and seen to be doing good. What does our market offer Marsha? Well, it offers her a hidden lottery, a game of chance she has every chance of losing, for she has no real chance of knowing the rules. How do we do this? Because as she looks at the list of Google advertisers and makes her choice as to which one to engage with, she hasn't got a clue that one of three very different things are about to happen to her. Thing one happens if she chooses a price comparison site or insurer or bank. A brand she knows, probably. She'll find lots of useful information if she wants it. And if she answers a few questions, she'll get a price or choice of prices. And if she wants to buy, a few minutes later, she has her cover, in much the same way as she bought her children's clothes, maybe. Marsha knows she doesn't get it all. But she's happy, she's made her own choices, and she gets that on her own head be it. Oh, by the way, if she doesn't feel that confident making that decision, then the two biggest price comparison sites, and increasingly the insurers and banks, offer very clear signposts to a thoroughly vetted protection advisor, not always me, who can answer all her questions and make sure that she gets it right. So thing one works okay for Marsha, whether she's keen to move fast or keen to get it absolutely right for sure. Thing two happens if she clicks on an ad that turns out to be an advisor, as defined by the FCA, though not that Marsha or any other consumer would have any idea of the vital importance of that little phrase to them. If she happens to click on an advisor's ad, she will end up talking to someone who will probably ask her why she's thinking about life insurance. They will ask some other questions about her situation and will offer her their advice, guidance, arrange policies as she wishes. That's what an advisor does. Sometimes it's all very simple and quick. Sometimes it gets very complex. Crucially, though, if that advisor gets it wrong, and Marsha or her kids find they were missold in some way at some time in the future, they can seek full redress from a fully empowered, willing and able financial services ombudsman. Marsha and Co. really are properly protected the moment they deal with an advertiser who is an advisor. But thing three is where we as a market fail Marsha and thousands of others like her every week. For thing three sounds and feels to any consumer deceptively the same thing as thing two. And yet it is totally different. That's the trick our market pulls on Marsha. For if she clicks on, in fact, most of the ads, she'll be talking to a thing she's never actually heard of, a non-advisor. In fact, a subset, a telesales non-advisor. A salesperson who seems just like an advisor. He too asks her why she's making inquiries about life insurance, gets into a bit of detail as to what she might want, and then also proposes solutions. Along the way, reading out words that explain that he's not advising, he's simply giving her the facts and letting her make her own choice. Which is exactly what advisors do, actually, but never mind. Of course, that sounds fine to Marsha. So she buys what she's being sold, not realizing that it has been sold to her by someone with no duty of care whatsoever as to the outcomes they cause her and her children. The reason our market cannot ever be trusted by consumers is that thing three appears to any normal consumer to be the same as thing two. But in thing three, if the teleseller missells to Marsha, then when she or her family realize they didn't get what they needed, They get almost no right to the Ombudsman's protection. The non-advice firm will successfully defend itself by saying that they didn't give advice. The decision to buy was Marsha's and Marsha's alone. That is how your market, our market, tricks consumers. It compliantly denies them the Ombudsman's protection by using words that sound harmless, but carry a hidden meaning known to us in this room, but that consumers only find out about when it's far too late. Why do we let persuasive salespeople talk to innocent consumers? Why do we let persuasive people fully trained in compliant wording and sales skills, but crucially, with no need whatsoever to get the right outcome for Marsha, represent us, the protection market? No need to achieve the right outcome. No duty of care whatsoever, but a very urgent imperative of hitting their sales targets in an environment designed specifically to make the most money possible out of Marsha by exploiting a regulatory loophole. How can we, as a market, seek to be trusted when we let down thousands of consumers like that every week? When non-advice was invented to placate the giant tide sales forces of that era, all since disgraced, technology offered no quick and easy self-serve alternative to speaking to someone. But nowadays, Marsha can happily trade online, knowing she is making her own decisions, not fondly believing a persuasive salesperson has her best interest at heart, when he's just trying to hit a target and make some money. Thing 3 is not fit for purpose. It serves no part of our market that other, more honest methods cannot reach. It is thus redundant and needs to be retired. If you seek to persuade people of things, then to treat a customer fairly, you need to accept responsibility for the outcomes your persuasion causes. Only then can our market grow to be trusted and to improve and to grow the good it does. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Tom. So, I'd like to invite up to the podium now, Mr. Phil Jeynes. Round of applause, please.
Thanks, Roger. Afternoon, everyone. I suppose I should say before I start that nothing I'm about to say should be construed as advice. The points made in this presentation are purely for your information. Do with it as you wish. Okay, so look, I've got a few slides, but don't worry, they're just pictures, so I'm not going to bore you with death by PowerPoint. I thought what I'd use my 5 minutes for is to dispel 5 myths as best I can, and then we can get into some juicy questions later on if you think I haven't done a good enough job. So the first one, non-advised firms are all bad apples. So Tom's description, very stark description of the non-advised Thing 3, I think I might get a t-shirt made up of Thing 3, is absolutely true of some non-advised firms. It's also absolutely true of some advice firms. They don't do a very good job for customers. Customers come away thinking they've got one thing, and actually they have another. So it's simply not true that the fault of all of these ills lies squarely at the door of non-advised sales. There's good and bad on both sides. Let me give you some examples of what I think a good quality intermediary firm looks like. They have full call recording if they're telesales and full quality assurance. They have award-winning, externally vetted training schemes that mean that their advisors and non-advisors are the best they can be. They give full access and audit rights to insurer partners and corporate partners alike. They don't churn their book immediately the clawback period has ended. Their complaints ratio is low, less than 0.5% of sales. Their Trustpilot score is strong, and customer referrals makes up their 3rd largest source of new business. They have an escrow account in tandem with their core partner insurers where they provision for clawback so that both sides feel they're protected. What I've just described are some of the measures that Reassured take to ensure that we are a quality business. We know that there are plenty of advised and non-advised competitors that don't live up to those standards. One insurer told me that in 2021, 100% of agency closures they made were advice firms. And 50% of agencies that closed due to their business going bust were advice firms. So we're not trying to paint a picture here that advice firms are failing. What we're saying is there are bad apples in both barrels. We must stop grouping firms by their advice status and instead start doing so, as I think Robert mentioned in his presentation earlier, by quality. Measurable quality outcomes based on the quality of the business that those brokers are writing. Dodgy ads. Dodgy ads only end up in non-advised call centres. Absolutely a myth. At Reassured, we generate around 60,000 new leads per month, largely off our own marketing from a myriad of different sources. Inevitably, some of those adverts are not going to be to the taste of every single person in this room or every household up and down the country. And in fact, two examples I regularly cite of adverts that I thought were really good and got mixed reactions in the public were Aviva's Dead Dad, I think it was Ghost Dad, not Dead Dad, Ghost Dad ad with Paul Whitehouse, and Dead Happy's campaigns, both of which received complaints, and both of which I felt were comfortably on the right side of the line. What we do see in the market is some genuinely misleading ads, some ads that tell complete lies to hook customers in, and they end up, as Tom described, in a situation where they buy one thing thinking they've got another. Again, we know that those leads end up with advised and non-advised businesses, and it does us no good at all to throw stones across the divide. We need to work together with people like Alan at Contact State to root those people out and to put an end to it. Access to insurance. Good buzz phrase that the industry has developed over the last few years, and some enormously important work that's been done by people in this room and elsewhere. Access to insurance falls flat if we are prescriptive about the way that we give access to customers. This isn't just about challenging insurers to give better breadth of cover. This is about ensuring that customers can get to that cover in as many different ways as they want to. Earlier on, we saw a presentation with the traditional sales funnel. Life insurance isn't like that. Life insurance is not a funnel. It's a board of snakes and ladders. And every time a customer feels like they've climbed a ladder, they hit another slake and slide back down again. And the crucial work that LifeSearch, Reassured, and many others in this room do is in helping them climb those ladders. We need more ladders in this industry, not fewer. Fourth one. That's an acorn and an oak tree, by the way. It's probably not very clear. We only get one chance with customers. This has come up a couple of times today, that in our industry, we see customers as a one-off transaction. You get them once, you sell them something, that's it. Job done, move on to the next one. Insurers are largely reticent to get in touch with their customers other than at point of claim. And brokers don't do a very good job, again, on non-advised and advised sides of the fence, at keeping in touch with those customers. That doesn't happen in other industries. Pensions, savings, investments. If an 18-year-old opens a savings account and puts £10 a month aside out of their first job, they're not locked into that for the next 50 or 60 years. We're going to go back to them. We're going to ask them to increase those contributions. They're going to get pay rises. They're going to have families. We have other touch points. As an industry, it's our responsibility to re-engage with customers rather than viewing them as one-off transactions. What we're doing at Reassured is actively growing the market. It's absolutely indisputable that's what's happening. And it's almost entirely genuinely new business, not churn, which others count as new business. You can't seriously tell me that that's a negative, just because not every customer takes an all-singing, all-dancing multi-benefit plan straight off the bat. And finally, the biggest myth of all, the market would be better off without non-advised sales. In fact, we need more routes to market for the customer, more ladders, not fewer. Our market, this is the Swiss Re stats, the last 5 years, not including this year we're in, is broadly stagnant. And in fact, shrank in 2020, a year when our customers should value what we do most. It went backwards. And it's questionable how much of that is actually new business at all, because insurers count anything that comes through, whether that's a new customer or a rebroke. Outsiders to this industry would be baffled as to why we're having this debate in 2021. Imagine a restaurant that's capable of seating 3 times as many customers, yet turns away people at the door because they don't like the way they want their steak cooked. It makes no sense. It's high time we accepted that people want to buy in myriad different ways: digital, face-to-face, over the phone, advised, non-advised, and unite in serving them with quality outcomes rather than infighting. I close by saying, over the last 2 years, Reassured customers have resulted in £40 million worth of claims paid. Just our customers. You can't tell me that's not a good outcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. And our final 5-minute opener, please welcome Emma Thomson. A round of applause, please.
Well, hopefully, last but not least, we've got a room here of people that are hugely engaged in our market, which is amazing. But unfortunately, we have got lots of consumers, as we have talked about throughout the day, that just don't understand what we do, don't trust us enough to actually deliver what we say we're going to do. And we also have, which we haven't really talked about, an enormous number of advisors in our market that do not engage with protection, either fully or just partially. Now, I am absolutely in the camp of I value advice. I obviously worked at LifeSearch for many years, and I'm proud to be at Sesame Bankhall Group, where we absolutely champion the value of advice. In fact, in our network, we don't actually have any non-advisors at all. We used to, I'm told, it was before my time, but we used to, and ultimately we decided not to actually have any non-advised firms in our network because the quality just was not there. The consumer outcomes were not ones that we supported. And for us, obviously taking on responsibility for those AR firms, it just wasn't something that we were happy to do. So we've moved away from that, and for us, we're championing the advisors that we've actually got within our network and working with us within our mortgage club. And whilst obviously Phil and Tom are here representing their own advisors and workers within their businesses, for me, I'm actually here. We have different challenges. We're a network, we're a mortgage club. So with all the advisor firms that we have working with us, we've got about 10,000 advisors. So I'm kind of stood here, kind of representing about 10,000 advisors. And as much as I would love to say that all those advisors love protection, engaged in it, and are regularly having conversations with their customers, sadly, that's just not the case. And that, for me, is a huge challenge for us. So like Phil said, to be fair, it's not really a conversation always about non-advice versus advice. We've actually got to address the fact that we have both good and bad, and we have got advisors that may be giving absolutely excellent advice when it comes to pensions and investments and mortgages, but they are not properly talking about protection. And we have a real duty of care to try and appeal to those as much as we are trying to appeal to our consumers, because we do good stuff. I'm stood here, testament that we do good stuff. I'm a claimant. Mr. Casey, put your hand up. You're a claimant. There will be other claimants in the room who have benefited from what we do. And that's a really powerful message that we absolutely have to get across. I think one of the other things in terms of lead gen, as a network, as a mortgage club, again, we don't have the same challenges that Reassured, LifeSearch, and many of you in the room have, because we're not directly advertising to try and get consumers through the door. But we do obviously have those firms that we need to work with. But for me, the key message that we're going to be giving to our advisor firms next year is not just a question of getting new people through the front door and not paying any attention to the people walking out the back. And to be perfectly honest, that is something that we absolutely need support from providers to help us with as advisor firms. Because, Rob, you mentioned annual statements earlier. Every conference for the last God knows how many years, we have talked about annual statements and supporting existing customers and making sure that we're keeping in touch with those people. That is a huge customer bank for us. That is where we should be getting as many of our leads from, getting them to refer their family and friends because of the good work that we have done. But most importantly, keeping in touch with them. And for us, we have a responsibility on network. We've got hundreds and hundreds of mortgage advisors who have got thousands of customers that have very little protection in place, if any protection at all. And that's something that we, as a network, absolutely want to change. And I'm sure, obviously, the other networks represented in the room also want to deliver that. I think one thing as well to point out that people do want to have a conversation, and whether you agree with Phil or whether you agree with Tom, the latest Amy Viewpoint research showed that between the ages of 18 to 34, people want to have a conversation. 73% of those people are happy to chat about protection, which is a really great thing. And we need to grab that with both hands and do something about it. So whether you'll walk out of here feeling that you've got a different opinion based on what Phil has said or Tom has said, I don't know. Maybe I'm slightly on a different side of things because I'm not quite so polarised as either of them. But whatever it is, I absolutely do say that there is absolutely a role for non-advice in this market. We have got people buying insurance particularly through online channels that would never have engaged with an advisor. Now, the vast majority of those are going to drop out of that process. An advisor might scoop them up and help them actually understand what they really need. But ultimately, we can't just knock non-advice completely because it does have a role to play. So anyway, I'm going to stop and sit down, and over to you now. Thank you very much.
That was bang on 5 minutes.
People like Emma who have claimed, people like Steve who have claimed. We've heard from people like Stephanie this morning who have claimed. Isn't it our aim as an industry as a whole to make sure that more people who need it could be in that position where they were able to claim? And the bottom line is we need to get more people talking. Now, I made a joke about bad advertising earlier on, and I know that Alan Desmere, wherever he is, hand up, Alan, are you still in the room? He's done a lot of work, and quite a few of the problems that we've had with lead generation ads seem to have been fixed. Sometimes ads do have to be provocative to get people to take action. As long as they don't cross the line, if it gets more people to think about protection, that's okay, isn't it? If somebody goes to an advisor or a non-advisor and they get protection, that's got to be okay, isn't it?
No,
as long as they
that is your mistake, Roger.
As long as they know the difference. So my opening question to try and smooth this over a little bit is it down to language? Is it down to the understanding that the individual has, whether they come from adverts, whether they come from other forms of leads? Is it the language around what advisors are and what non-advisors are that we need to clarify for everybody?
When you call or speak to a non-advisor, and I'm not singling out particular firms, I think that is the biggest mistake you can make. When you speak to a non-advisor, they rely on two tiny bits of language, two magic phrases, to essentially keep the ombudsman at bay. Because if the ombudsman isn't there, then you don't have to train people up in product knowledge. You don't have to do anything. You just have to make the sale. And for all the good that you can do in making the sale, you have a sales culture. You do not have a culture of care for the customer. The words that are used, I quoted one, I'm not giving you advice, I'm giving you the facts. You make your own decision. If that was clarified at the outset of the call as being designed to withdraw the ombudsman's protection from you, the decision maker, and what the ombudsman's protection meant to you, then I think maybe there would be some credibility in the non-advised argument. But of course, that's the last thing a salesperson, the vast majority of them are young men, salesman can do. That would just destroy the sale, so it's ignored. And then the other magic phrase that enables all of non-advice is people like you. I spoke to a very good non-advisor by Phil's measures last week. Within 45 seconds of the call beginning, the salesman had suggested that people like me who had asked for £200,000 worth of cover should have £380,000 to £400,000 to leave some for the kids. There had been no question of my income. I could have been on 10,000 or $1 million. That was not the issue. But people like you means that he was no longer responsible for the content of those words. That is what a sales culture does. And the FCA have said that that culture equals customer outcomes. A sales culture is poisonous to them. It exists to make the sale. You can train as much as you like, but you cannot take that away until you apply regulatory responsibility for the outcomes you cause. I'll stop there, Roger.
I don't disagree with much of that. I think sales culture over the years has suddenly taken on a pejorative. I don't see it that way. I've been a salesman all my life. I've always had customers' best interests at heart, whether that was double glazing, insurance, mortgages, endowments. I got a lot of them wrong. The crucial thing is the culture of the business, as Tom quite rightly says. The culture of Reassured's business is a sales culture. We want to sell more life insurance to more customers than anybody else in the market, and we do. The customer's clear about what they're buying, they buy a good product. Insurers tell us that our statistics stack up with any advice firm out there in terms of quality measurement. So I absolutely agree with Tom. It is about the culture you imbue in your staff, the culture of caring for the customer. And Tom made the point earlier that outside of the realms of financial services, the general public doesn't understand the difference between advice and non-advice at all. If you ask your mate if they got advice when they bought their laptop, they'll say, yeah, from the guy in Curry's. Now that's not a regulatory advice. They think they got advice. The default position for customers is they think they're responsible for the purchase. And I think the onus is on advisors to explain the benefits of speaking to them above speaking to somebody who cannot give advice.
You get one chance at the customer. Actually, you said we don't, and you're quite right. You can have a lifetime of chances once you have the customer. But customers don't choose non-advice. Customers don't say, I want non-advice. Emma, there's a huge difference between thing one, which is online trading, which I have no issue with, as I explained.
Yes.
It's thing three, which is telesales non-advice.
And
so it's telesales non-advice that I am focusing on. I think I try to make that clear. A customer doesn't choose that. A customer clicks on an ad or reaches a call center. What happens to the customer then is what happens. They don't have any choice in that. So they're not choosing non-advice. Non-advised calls, the many I've had, routinely don't get to underwriting for 25, 30 minutes. That first whole chunk of call is persuasion. It's selling. A sales culture is something that the FCA have been trying to stop, despite your words, which I used to hear in the 80s a lot too, Phil. A sales culture is what the FCA have been trying to stop applying to consumers in financial services since 1987, because they've realized that the sales imperative for the deliverer is too strong. It's the drive to make money. And unless the deliverer is held responsible, regulated by the ombudsman, that drive takes over. You get results which are pretty clear and which take on the question of growth in the market, for my mind, irrevocably. I asked a reinsurer, Phil, forgive me. I asked a reinsurer to give me a comparison between their book that they could define as telephone non-advised and their book they could define as telephone advised. The numbers they returned were with telephone non-advised. The cancelled from inception rate is 20% on their book, and the first year lapse rate is 18%. That's 38% of consumers who've changed their mind in the first year. And that's not one firm, that is a book from the sector. My problem is not with one firm. My problem is with the whole concept and sector. And it should be yours too. The telephone advised, the respective metrics were 6 and 8. That's 14% of people who changed their mind in the first year, which I think is too high and needs working on. But 38, you cannot grow a market. You cannot grow a market if you're losing 38% of the people you just won, because you're losing their trust. Something happened to them that wasn't right. That's why they changed their mind. Maybe a change in circumstances, what, for 14%? I'd say the rest. They suddenly realized what they'd done was wrong.
One of the things that I wonder about is, obviously we've got a lot of product providers in the room. You've done your due diligence on both the advised firms and on the non-advised firms. And I'm not thinking that many people in the room have a problem with either, because you were happy to accept business from either. And those checks are in place. So the industry seems to be happy with the situation. So I do wonder, what is the end game? What do we want the landscape to look like? Have you any thoughts on that, Emma? What would you, having heard the debate so far, I know you're mainly in the advice camp, but if you had way of predicting the future. What would we want as an industry? We seem to be pretty happy with this.
I think one of my questions would be, do we actually have it right? Because, you know, some of us heard a presentation recently, you know, 45 million quid's worth of commission was written off for failed businesses. Mostly DA firms, mostly non-advised. You know, so actually, have we got the right agencies and the due diligence in place to make sure that those firms that are writing business should actually be writing business? We heard Robert talk earlier about the mortgage market getting rid of 2,000 advisors that weren't fit for purpose. You know, and we know that insurers over the last few years have absolutely tightened up how they're assessing intermediaries that want to write business with them. But we're not there yet. I know of one insurer that was talking to me recently about an intermediary who was trying to get an agency and was saying, well, we've got agencies with these other firms over here. And yet we know that one of the firms that have given them an agency have made their terms of business so poor because they don't want any business from that firm. But rather than switching off the agency, they've just done it in a way that isn't really ruffling as many feathers, but is making sure that the outcome is the same, that they're not going to get any business from that dodgy broker. But that dodgy broker is still out there writing business. And for me, it's like, well, that firm is not only trying to hoodwink the insurer that they're trying to get an agency from, but they're potentially hoodwinking consumers that are actually going to their website and seeing that big firm's logo proudly displayed to say, we're working with this insurer. But actually that insurer wants nothing to do with them. So I don't think we are there yet. I think absolutely strides have been taken in the right direction to help clean up the dodgy brokers in our market, absolutely. But I think more needs to be done.
I think you're spot on, Emma, and it comes back to my point around we should be focusing on the quality of firms rather than their advice status or anything else that, you know, whether they're telephony or face-to-face. It's about the quality metrics, which should be comparable across the industry. So I agree with Tom. If you ask a reinsurer, they group it in quite blunt ways, and lots of insurers do as well. That's non-advised telesales, that's advice face-to-face, that's a mortgage broker. I mean, mortgage brokers covers an entire multitude of sins. That's the wrong turn of phrase, sorry, Robert. An entire host of fantastic firms. And as Emma said, you know, and Roger said earlier, it sounds like we're a bit behind them in terms of cleaning up the industry and saying, actually, we just don't want business from these people because the outcomes are not good.
I think to take up your point, the question of bad advisors and bad non-advisors, I see as relatively moot. There will be shocking advisors out there somewhere. I'm sure there's shocking architects and shocking lawyers and shocking accountants, and we know they're shocking doctors. It happens, you read about those ones in the press. So there is bad stuff in every industry, market, profession, call us what you will. The difficulty of improving advice standards, which I would love to be our market's primary job. I really would. So much of what we've been frustrated by this morning would go if there were really high advisory standards consistently across the market. How can you ask advisors to take on the extra burden of cost to continually improve what they do when they compete on equal terms? Indeed, the very highest commission rates in the market are paid to non-advisors. When they compete on equal terms with people who have none of that duty of care. All you do when you make yourself a better advisor is you add cost into your business for no financial gain. Oh, you improve consumer outcomes, you improve your reputation, you can long-term grow a business. That's what I've been doing since 1998, continually trying to get better at giving advice and serving customers and achieving better outcomes. But that is actually the wrong way to make money in our game. You need to rid yourself of responsibility. You need to tie yourself to 2 or 3, and maybe a quarter, 3.5 insurers. And you need to use your volume to extract from them commission rates you would never have seen the likes of otherwise, no matter how good an advisor you were, no matter how good your customer outcomes are. So you can't fix the advice sector while you force it to compete against about a third of the market and growing who don't have to take any responsibility for the outcomes they cause. You cannot improve your market's overall position that way. You have to cut out the non-advised sector and all the harms it does. And then you simply ask the very best non-advisors to make the very small shift from where they stand now to become advisors. They are extraordinarily well-managed businesses at the top of that. tribe, may I call you that? The top of that group is better. They will effect the transition within 6 months, easily. And they're well backed, they can do it, and then you will have an advisory-only sector. And at that stage, this market can turn itself into true growth model.
I think picking up on that, I would agree. And I think picking up on what you said earlier, Phil, about, you can go to a non-advisor and the customer walks away knowing exactly what they have bought. My worry is that they're not walking away knowing what they haven't bought. Because with an advised conversation, you're actually talking about all the things that potentially the customer doesn't even know about. And if you are going online, there are products that we know, predominantly IP, are not available online for consumers to buy. They are bought because the customer has actually had a really good conversation with an advisor to understand that. And I think that's the challenge that we have. And for me, when I talked earlier about that 73% of younger people wanting to actually have a conversation, a chat about protection, yeah, a chat, but what do they actually want out of that? For me, if you want to have a chat with somebody, you actually really want some help and advice. If you don't want to, and we've all bought online and you get these little pop-ups, do you want to chat? And I'm like, no, I'm quite happy buying my shopping without the interruption, thanks very much. That's why I've gone online and not gone into a shop to ask for some help. But ultimately, if you're wanting to have a chat, that's, to be fair, where I actually quite struggle. If you're wanting to have a chat with somebody, why wouldn't you actually have advice? If you don't want to chat with somebody, that's absolutely fine. And we absolutely need to have those avenues available for those consumers to choose how they want to interact, because some people just don't want to have a conversation. They're not very sociable.
That's the absolute key. Sorry, I'm going to cut across you there.
That's all right.
They want choice. They want choice. We're not saying close off advice, close off digital. We're saying open. Put more ladders in, help more customers get to protection. Income protection is a really interesting point, because if our measure of success for a firm is how much income protection they sell, then this whole industry is in some serious bother, because income protection ain't selling. We're celebrating the hard work that many in this room have done to increase it over the years, and it is a fraction of the market still. It's woefully undersold. So I'm quite happy to join in and say, yeah, not enough people know about income protection. Our view is the product is not fit for purpose. You cannot sell it without giving advice, which is why we don't sell it. So yeah, absolutely, there are customers coming to us that will not buy income protection. We'll work on a way to solve that because we think it's important. But right now, the product is the issue, not the method of sale.
Okay, I'd like to come over here for another either observation or question.
A quick question if you don't mind. So we're touching a bit on here quality of advice and sales, non-advised, advised, and so on. For me, there's two elements I wouldn't mind your views on. One is indemnity versus non-indemnity commission, so upfront or drip payment. And the other thing is the piece touching on around outcomes. It's a bit like in my world, we monitor clinical outcomes. If advisors were paid and firms were paid on the quality of the sale only and could only take drip commission, do you think that would change the situation of sales practices in the market?
It's not the commission that causes misbehavior in our market. It's a culture of sales. That sales culture can exist in advisors and non-advisors. It just is totally true of all non-advisors. There isn't an advisory culture there, otherwise they would de facto be advisors.
One of the things that Tom brought up as well before about is commission, and undoubtedly I think most people in this room would probably agree that without commission the protection market would be in trouble, because unlike other parts of the financial services industry, it's just the way that it drives, and people aren't going to pay £1,000 to be given advice on a term assurance. Maybe the FCA, the government, will eventually have another look, and we need to be careful what we wish for. But what do we wish for? If they do have a look at the commission model again, what would be the best outcome for not only advisors, non-advisors, but also the customer as well? What would be the best model? Right. Emma, do you want to start with that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think we've talked a lot about choice. I think for advisors, we need to give them choice, because we've seen, obviously indemnity, non-indemnity, but actually there's not many insurers that offer hybrid in the middle. So I think that's something that we need to drive forward to actually help support businesses. I've also heard some insurers, historically it's kind of like, well, we want people to be moving on to non-indemnity, but actually there's a couple of insurers that actually prefer to pay indemnity. And then I think one of the perhaps elephants in the room is loaded rates, which has got quite a lot of activity in the press recently. We, for the record, don't have loaded rates available to our advisors in the network. We used to, so we did go down that road, but we removed that about 5 years ago because we just don't feel that is the right thing to do for consumers, because we have firms that have got training in place, they invest in their people, they do all of those good things, but they don't need to take loaded rates. And we've got a lot of advisor firms that work with us because they don't want to have loaded rates available to their customers. I've recently heard that one of our peers, a network peer, is also going to drop their loaded rates panel, which is fantastic to hear. But obviously we do still have loaded rates out in the market, and I don't necessarily think that is a good outcome for consumers.
Phil, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I think we're in a weird place in this industry, because I think if you were to go back in time and start from scratch, indemnity commission is probably not where you'd set it up. But we are in there now, and Tom described the issue very eloquently, that for businesses of scale like ours, the cost of acquiring that customer is largely upfront, and it's ours, it's not the insurer's. So transitioning away from that would be difficult. Now, I mentioned earlier, we put aside, an element for clawback, knowing that that's going to come down the track. So we're diligent in doing so. Not everybody is. But so I think the best we can hope for really is a maintaining of the status quo, unless someone comes up with a much better idea.
Love this debate, so thank you. It's been really great. Phil, the question I want to ask you is, what are you frightened of? You're a regulated firm with an FCA badge, and your senior execs are on the hook for what you produce and deliver. What is it about the model that actually you're frightened of actually accepting the liability for the thing you're actually doing, which is talking to the customer and selling them a product? It's the bit I've never got about the gap between advice and non-advice, because, to be quite clear, I took what was Abbey, became Santander through ICOBs, and we had to go through the whole debate with the board about whether we're going to do advised or non-advised. And what we couldn't work out was where the line was. What was the benefit of actually not doing it? Because we own the consumer. The customer trusts us, we own them, and we're liable, actually. You're just taking the FOS and FSS risk out of it. And I don't get anything other than pure economics why you do it.
It's a really good question, Robert, thanks. We're not frightened of anything in that regard. We are a regulated entity. We behave in the correct way with our customers, and we give good customer outcomes. I mentioned our complaints ratio, which is lower than 0.5%. So we don't have a big issue in terms of worrying about customer outcomes and worrying about recourse to the regulator. The difference between us and the way that some others are looking at this debate is we are not evangelical about non-advice. Non-advice is the route that our business has taken very successfully to get our product out to as many people that need it as is possible. And we're a success story. We don't think that everybody should buy that way. And as I mentioned earlier, we don't think that they should only do it once and do it with us. We want them in the market as opposed to a market that's shrinking. And to prove that point, we do have an advice arm that we set up recently. We're not afraid of it at all. And we recognise that for some customers, that's the right place for them. Similarly, we're going to launch our digital proposition because we recognise that some people don't want to speak to us at all, whether it's with an advice hat on or not. So we're not frightened of anything. And we treat our customers in the correct fashion and we give the right outcomes.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to bring things to a close now. Hopefully, we have kept your attention for the last hour or so, and hopefully we've kept you interested for the last hour or so, and that your desire will be to continue the debate in the pub or in the coffee shop afterwards, and the action you need to take is to talk to these individuals outside of this room. But before that, it's been quite hard and straight talking, so I really do think they deserve a massive, massive round of applause.